Hey, this is Christian Buckley with a Microsoft Buzz Chat interview. I'm here with Tom. Hey, Tom, how's it going?
Hey, Christian. Great to see you on a nice summer day.
Yeah, it's we're just past the 4th of July holiday, and so we were just kind of talking about. Did you experience any rain? Was there any moisture there in the Seattle area that dampened literally the fireworks displays?
Not at all. It was a beautiful day here. There were no teleprompter issues that I noticed.
Oh, are you talking about like the national show? I didn't watch any of that stuff.
You know, I grew up in DC, so I have been to the 4th of July fireworks at the mall many times.
It's funny. We were sitting on a giant, there's new house construction everywhere, and there was a giant mound of dirt, and there's all these, and we were kind of looking east across, we're in Lehi, Utah, looking east across the river at Thanksgiving Point. There's a huge fireworks show going off there. And of course, the skyline, as you look up and down the valley, there's just fireworks everywhere. But we were sitting on this giant mound, all these other people that are down below, and my son and my nephew watching this. Just an incredible show. But I was playing on my phone all of the patriotic music, Star
Oh
Spangled
yeah.
Banner and stuff, had that going. And I was explaining to them, I said, I've never been there, but I've watched like the DC show, but like this is the same, the music that they're playing, and it almost kind of went synchronized with the lights. But yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love
So
to see that.
there's a what is it? The one of the military service bands I think plays at the Capitol, and you can see the fireworks, which are shot from the reflecting pool. Or maybe even from the Potomac River, I can't remember. But they generally the best viewing spot's the Washington Monument. That's where you're closest. But if you want to hear the music, you want to be at the Capitol, which is like a mile
All the way
away.
down the lawn. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it'd be amazing to go there. I'm just at that age where I think about that and I'm just like, oh, the traffic nightmare of getting in and out of there.
Oh, it's horrible. In DC? No, it's amazing. Now, I grew up 30 blocks from the Capitol, so we could actually walk.
Yeah. Well,
And
that's what you
really,
have
that's
to
the
do.
by far the fastest way.
Right. Well,
Walking
yeah.
blocks.
I made the mistake of dropping the boys off. They were going to go down and do a parade, to watch a parade. I'm not into the parade scene, and drove down south and realized that to drop them off at my son and his wife's apartment down there, I would have to drive across where the parade was going. And I didn't do the math to realize that that's going to be an incredible traffic, effort. So anyway, but well, Tom. So we've got this whole piece where we're talking about other stuff, which is completely irrelevant 6 months from now. Someone watching the video, but what's your background? What's your role there at Microsoft? Why don't you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a content developer in the OneDrive and SharePoint team, and I'm really focused on helping people have the best experience in the product, especially anywhere there's words involved.
Yeah, words. Awesome. Well, so I've often said this, that it is Microsoft has definitely stepped up over the last few years around the documentation, the content that's provided around the platform. Certainly true within the SharePoint space. And I think it was, Joel Olson used to say, so, fellow MVP and RD and the original IT pro, the admin for SharePoint when it launched, it was there in Microsoft IT back at the beginning. But he said, a lot of the SharePoint community, the reason why it built up so quickly and has such a passionate following, but was the lack of documentation, the lack of the technical help out of Microsoft, and so the community stepped up to fill that gap. And kind of you came from the community, you were an MVP, and they sucked you in.
Sure. Yeah, and I think documentation is certainly part of it, right? And especially when it comes to IT pros, planning, deploying, setup. Often you need something beyond the words in the product there to help to get the most out of the product. So yeah, that's definitely important. And yeah, I remember back when I was deploying SharePoint 2007, Joel's writing was very helpful. And honestly, I think as at the time, I think he was a PM or a product marketing manager. I mean, they are that part of the product team is integral to communicating the value of the product and how to use it, and still to this day. So I would say, if anything, the efforts that Joel was doing, kind of, I think probably a little less integrated at the time, are better integrated today.
Well, that's something that's an important role, a distinction. I think with a lot of companies that have product marketing roles, so versus product management, the product marketing folks, one of their primary roles should be to identify the users, the key scenarios, and tell the story, help people understand how within these roles, within these scenarios, how those products, how the features are used. Like any organization, there'll be people that have that title that do something slightly different. I mean, I spent years as a technology evangelist doing a lot of product marketing type things, but I mean, I would look at a lot of what you do as kind of an extension of that product marketing. Do you see it differently? Is there more of a distinction between the roles of product marketer and what you do around content development?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting, and something a lot of people don't think about often, but Microsoft's such a big company and has so many customers that it's important to focus on all the different aspects of the product. And so because of that, yeah, these types of distinctions can be made. Who's focused on product marketing, who's focused on product management. And really, I think the big new distinction more recently at Microsoft is the focus on design. And that didn't always, so you started off, the company, I think, was really founded by engineers, you could say. Paul Allen and Bill Gates would describe it that way. And then, so a lot of it was engineering driven. Then you kind of added this product management layer later, and product marketing, and you're able to specialize on these different things. And now, with the focus on a great user experience, design is really one of the leading ways the product is modified. And so that's, I think, really interesting, and something I learned joining here. I did not know there was such a focus on product design now these days, as opposed to the people that we'd met in the community in the past had mostly been product managers and product marketing managers.
Well, it's interesting, if you, certainly if you design a product well, and this is, I talk about this a lot, but when Satya became CEO of Microsoft, and his first keynote speech was at the partner conference, and he talked a bit around the need to look at the end-to-end user experience.
Yeah.
And where traditionally, I mean, certainly it's true within Microsoft, where you had product focused, and even, and as you know, program managers and development teams, engineering teams focus on specific features within that product. And you had very few people looking at the end-to-end even of a product. But now he was talking about here's the customer experience. This is what they're trying to accomplish. We may own pieces of that, but not the entire story. But we need to design, we need to build our products recognizing what customers are trying to do end to end. That would, could potentially reprioritize what you develop, how you develop that, how you market that, how you position it, the storytelling that you tell around, the use cases and scenarios. I mean, is that something that you, in your role, do you talk about that end-to-end customer?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that I mentioned Bill Gates, and so it's interesting to compare, I think, the evolution of Microsoft over time, from the founding to to now. And I certainly Satya represents a big step in that change, in the evolution that's just really responding, I think, to the market and where Microsoft needs to go in the future. But if you just look at the mission statements, right? A lot of people are familiar with that, the original mission statement to get a PC on every desk, right? And you're right, that's about products, right? And then you look at Satya's mission statement, it's about people. And that plays really well into what you're saying about, considering considering who's using your product as you're designing it and developing it, and talking about it. It certainly, I know that you have a strong interest in marketing. It certainly affects the marketing. You hear people talking about the products and the value of the products to them in a lot of Microsoft's marketing these days, as opposed to the older method, which was showing off the product, right? And so it's a much different focus. You want to focus on what is the effect the things we're doing have on people in the world, as opposed to what is the coolest new thing that we've developed.
Yeah, another, I think, a distinction there that I think that ties perfectly into that of demonstrating the product versus talking about the people and their usage of those products, those software products. But is to go out and market based on features versus market on what the users are actually doing and trying to accomplish. Again, where the technology that Microsoft provides may just be a piece of that story. That is, there's been an evolution in, I know the events that you've been to, you've seen the same thing, but there's been an evolution in the way that conferences are even put together, free or paid. There's still the very much like, hey, this is a new release, here's what the technology goes and does. But where the sessions, the number of sessions were very small that were focused on, here is a role as a business user, or if you're an analyst, a business analyst, and what you're trying to accomplish over the day. There were community speakers that would go in and take that perspective, talk about the person, that role, the experience. And you see now going to conferences, so much more around roles and the scenarios than it was over the features of technology. I mean, again, in your role, I mean, how do you approach, new features, new capabilities? How do you look at that and decide, hey, this is what we need to go and write about and create?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there are two interesting things you talked about there. One was the evolution of the community, and you and I've been part of the SharePoint community for a while, and we talked about what drew us to it. And I think part of it is, partners have always been enabled to fill the gaps for Microsoft, right? I think that has always been a key to Microsoft's success, is enabling partners and allowing them to step in and provide value. So I know that's one thing that got us in, but what drew us into SharePoint, I think probably was this focus more on the business aspects. I think, anyway, from my perspective, when I moved from SQL Server and .NET user groups to SharePoint user groups, the difference was striking, right? The people in the SQL Server and .NET and Java user groups were very technology focused, right? Just thinking mainly about the product and what the changes were and how they could use it better or program it better. But when you go to a SharePoint user group, immediately you've got a totally different mix of people. It's not just developers and IT pros. You've got business analysts and designers and internal communicators and consultants. And a lot of the people in the audience, they don't really care so much about the latest feature unless it unlocks new business value for them. And so I think from the community perspective, I think SharePoint was already kind of made that evolution a long time ago from my perspective in terms of involving a new, different type of audience. And then when you talk about the work that I do at Microsoft, absolutely, considering the people is a huge part of it, right? So before we make major changes in the product, we're basing that on discussions that we're having with customers and potential customers too, right? Because it's one thing to make the product better for current customers. You see that in places like user voice, right? You've probably made suggestions there and voted up suggestions there.
I was just going to ask you about, like, what are your methods, your tools for capturing that voice of the customer? And so you went right into user voice.
Yeah, so I mean, user voice is great because it's like crowdsourcing, right? It scales very well. Again, you got 1 billion people using Office. How do you listen to 1 billion people effectively? It's not one-to-one interaction, right? There's not 1 billion people over here in Redmond able to listen. So you can't really have a personal one-on-one conversation with every single customer. So user voice is great because they've done a great job at scaling feedback and allowing a huge community to contribute at scale. But again, that's only, I think for one thing, that's capturing a specific audience, right? That's people who are engaged with the product. They care enough to go and either make a new request or vote up a request and actually really think deeply about the product. So I think it's a small fraction of the people using the products, and they're people using the products, right? And a lot of times, Satya's mission is to help, the whole planet achieve more. And really the growth for Microsoft is outside of that segment, right, of people that are using the product and heavily engaged in it. So you have to go beyond that. You can't just consider what people currently using the product wanted to do. You have to go out and talk to people that maybe are slightly less engaged. So we have a whole user research group inside design in the product team here, and they do focus groups. You might have seen some of those even at SharePoint conference. I'm not sure if you were involved with any, but there was a call that went out, and basically anybody could join a focus group at SharePoint conference, and we were proposing new product areas we're going into. We were talking about how to refine existing product areas, and we try to get a wide cross of people, admins, IT pros, end users, and make sure that we're taking into consideration the views of lots of different people.
Well, I wasn't involved this year, but I've done many of those types of events where it's focus groups where it's a group of 4 to 12 that are sitting in a room and going through and discussing that. Or I've done events where there's various tables around table topics and doing kind of a dive into those. But it's I'm actually a big fan of the whole unconference model, and almost that kind of follows that, where let the crowd kind of decide, hey, these are the things that we want to talk about, and break off into those groups and discuss and get a lot of great ideas. I even think of my monthly tweet jams as exactly that. It's where it's I'm seeding the discussion with 7 questions, but I'm really looking for people to go in and add, to that. The questions are purposefully left as being broad and open, so that it encourages people then to go in and take off in different directions based off of that. But it's I think that there needs to be, it was great to see. I think the only thing, and I provided feedback for this last SharePoint conference, was when are we bringing back the hands-on labs and doing some of that other stuff on site? I think it'd be good for that event. They do it at the European SharePoint conference, and it'd be great to see it back over there. That's the first 2 SharePoint conferences I did as an employee. I was in the hands-on lab the entire time, so helping do that. But
I've been a proctor in hands-on labs too. I've never made it to the European SharePoint conference. I didn't realize they were doing that. That's great. Yeah, I think, and there definitely is an aspect of that at Ignite, right? And I think maybe partly because it's a little more focused on like the IT pros, admins, right? Where I think in the past, a lot of the hands-on labs have been focused on, and in past SharePoint conferences, when I was proctoring, it was a lot of setup, configuration, type work that we were doing in the hands-on lab. And But yeah, well, that's good feedback. No, I hope somebody heard that. I think that, when you get people hands-on with some of this stuff, right? It's one thing to hear people talk about, new innovations in the product or share how they're using the product. But I feel like for me personally, learning, if I don't go and try that out, right? If there's not some
Right.
teachable aspect of me practicing what I've heard, it doesn't stick, right?
Well,
I need something
well,
hands.
that's why I think this was powerful about that model is that they generally they give you these worksheets, or you walk through different scenarios, so you're able to see. It's kind of like the early days of SharePoint. I mean, everybody knew how to log in and find the location and upload a document or download something and get back out. And people were just not aware of some of the other extensive features, capabilities that were within that. And that's actually part of the reasoning behind Tom Duff and I doing our productivity webinars. So we have like 140, 150 productivity tips, and it's broader across Office and Office 365. We touch on all the different products and things across those. But the idea was not that, hey, I'm going to go in a webinar and get 10 tips for things that I've never heard of before. You've probably heard of and maybe actively used half of them. But the idea is that we're going to show people different ways of doing the different things and things that they probably never experienced to go then try them. We're encouraging people to go and tap into kind of the untapped features and capabilities of the various products. And so and that's part of what I look at product marketing's role to do. If you are, it's just as much about listening as it is pushing messaging out there of how to use that.
Absolutely. And, so I watched one of your recent, your productivity tips, and I learned something. I can't remember. I tweeted it out, whatever it was I learned. That's another thing I like to do, right?
Now I have to look. Okay, while you're talking, I'm going to go look.
And see what I tweeted. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure I did, right? But that's a general pattern of me anyway. That's kind of how I got started in some of the more public writing, is just when I solved a tough problem that involved a lot of research, generally, I would always write it up. And then when that was blogging, right? With Twitter, what I try to do is if I'm ever sharing something, I try to share some insight, right? Something personal about it. Otherwise, it's just another retweet, right? It's like, right. It's just another small signal. But if you share your insight, for one thing, I capture it, right? Then I can later go back and say, what was that one thing I got, when I watched Christian and Tom talking, because otherwise I'll forget, right? And
right.
That makes it more tangible for me as well. And then the other thing you said about listening, I think, right, and that goes beyond, formal capturing of information from customers with the user voice and focus groups, right? Those are very formal processes, and there's only so much of that you can do. You have to be listening actively. I think you see the huge amount of engagement from the product team at places like SharePoint Conference and other community events as well. I know there was SharePoint Saturday, what is it, Pune? Have you?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that one just happened. Netherlands just happened.
Which one?
Netherlands.
Yeah, well, I thought Pune was very interesting because I've been doing a lot of design work with a group in Hyderabad, and a few of those product team members were out there at Pune, and I thought it was great that they're getting a huge increase in community events in India right now, and that the product team's there and involved in listening to the community at those events too.
Yeah, and it's always great to see when, like I did, I was the keynote for the SharePoint Saturday Ahmedabad, and I've actually been to Ahmedabad, India, and that was a major location for Gandhi. There's an area called Gandhi Nagat that's there, and anyway, just a fantastic region out there, and that was very happy to provide the keynote, and then to see faces that I recognize. You have like Mark Anderson out was there
Yeah.
on site, and
Right.
Tom Daly was there as well.
Yeah.
You know, like I didn't realize that either of them were going to be there physically, and it was just great to see that. But you know, then to hear them talk about, you know, their takeaways from being there, and some of the unique stories that come out of some of those regions, and you think we're all, you know, and SharePoint Saturday, of course, not just SharePoint, it's, you know, multiple platforms and tools that are across the Microsoft 365 spectrum. But it was still, you know, to hear, you know, unique, you know, regional differences between, you know, questions that are being asked, and you're not going to get that if you're just listening to one tool, one method. So like user voice, I mean, that can't be the only place for feedback from Microsoft, and it isn't.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
but that it's not just that, because there's also the Microsoft tech community, which is another place to go and have discussion. There are Yammer communities. There are you know, Twitter and LinkedIn groups. There's a huge community around private Facebook groups as well. In fact, I'm seeing the most activity on those, like the Collab 365 team out of the UK. They run a number of Office 365 communities that are, I mean, daily the conversations that go on. I probably you know, interact with those groups more than any other medium, you know, right now, because that's just where the activity is. So you can't look at one method of you know, one tool, and expect to get, you know, to really understand what the community is saying about their needs or what's shifting around the business climate.
And of course, nothing beats face-to-face communication. This is kind of a form of it, right? We see each other sometimes in person, but mentioning, you know, Mark Anderson out at Ahmedabad, that's, you know, people like you and Mark are out talking to customers and, you know, involved in the forums, and you talk to us too, right? And that's a form of feedback too. And even more than that, you know, you and Mark and other MVPs are really good examples of listening at scale too, right? Like you're talking about your tweet jams, right? I mean, that's a really, you see product marketing from SharePoint involved in those quite often, and one of the reasons is because they're able to listen and scale, and you're facilitating that, and you can provide insights directly to us one-on-one. Mark has participated in some more direct feedback, you know, the SharePoint P&P program, which is directly involving the community with SharePoint engineering, and in a number of different ways.
Maybe you should explain for those that aren't familiar with P&P. And
yeah, absolutely. So it's SharePoint patterns and practices, and there's a whole set of docs.microsoft.com that is dedicated to that community. A lot of the contributions from that part of the website are directly from community members, and the engineering team participates in a number of different ways. You know, one is listening, another is providing support in terms of how these patterns and practices, how the product team envisions the product being used in these different patterns and practices. And so there's that back and forth, right? Where you've got community members out there implementing, you've got the product team, you know, adding new functionality, and hopefully those play together very well, right? The types of challenges that people run into that they need to even develop these patterns and practices for might be something that ends up being solved better in the product as well later.
Well, I mean, I guess that's ultimately the hope. There is a selfish reason for Microsoft to want to participate in these community efforts is, you know, is getting that feedback, staying ahead of where things are today, and say, where can we improve? What do we need to add to? Where do we see the market, the needs shifting? Maybe there's a reason why if you suddenly see a rush of partners and providing solutions in an area, it may identify that there's a gap in the product or the platform. And so now naturally Microsoft needs to be, you know, watching those things and responding.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, saying selfish reasons, I think that hopefully there's a lot of win-win, right, is what we're always looking for.
Right.
And if you've seen this, right, if there's going to be something that's sustainable, a program that's sustainable from Microsoft, right, there's the company is self-sustaining, right? And in order to sustain a program, it's got to be providing back to the company in some way or another. And so, the Patterns and Practices program has been able to prove the value, and that's absolutely what you need to do in order to have a sustaining program like that. And that's it's providing value to the community, and the community is providing value to the product, and everybody, the customer in the end, wins because of that tight involvement there.
Right. It's look, there's we're getting into a kind of a larger soapbox statement around the value of community. That side of it. But I know that you understand this too. Is that there's community is not a marketing stunt for companies to participate in, and there are some organizations that do really well within the community, and that it's authentic involvement versus that they are just trying to piggyback on. I always here's a great example. There are user groups all over the place. I think here in the greater Salt Lake City area, there's 11 or 12 Microsoft-centric user groups. There might be more that are hidden. These are the ones I'm aware of that we've had contact with or attended. There are some user groups. I'm not saying any that are here in this area, but I have run into this over the last decade, where a user group is started by or managed or just hosted by a location by a company who then believes and treats it as their user group. And what happens is it then kills things off. It's like only their employees or their partners are the only ones speaking at it. It's not really a community play. It's a company doing marketing, and sales and marketing under the banner of community. And that is thrown some of these community events. SharePoint Saturdays have had some that have had problems because of that, where they're not truly looking at it as a community play. And so that you've got to be careful about that. Microsoft has to be careful. That we could go more into depth. I could tell you some stories you probably haven't even heard about, some community efforts where Microsoft then goes in and tries to strong arm, and this is our model and this is how we do. And it's like, okay, well, it stopped being a community effort and it just being an extension of Microsoft marketing. And then you see the end users just kind of dissipate, leave that.
I think what I'm hearing is really a message about being authentic, right? People, it's really hard to fake authenticity. If I'm not being real, it, right? Especially, in the value of face-to-face interaction, you can see it. You can see it in my face and the way I'm acting, right? And we talk about that in product design as well, just to bring it back to that. When we are introducing a new feature in the first run experience, or the empty state, or describing the new site template, the page templates, right? All of that has to be part of an authentic Microsoft voice, a very consistent voice. And if it's off, even in the slightest bit, that throws off your experience with the product and your connection with it, if it's not an authentic connection. That we're actually, as opposed to pushing somebody in a particular direction because we believe it's the right thing, for the product, we need to believe it's the right thing for the person. And that has to be authentic, right?
Well, and again, going back to there's been a change in how Microsoft approaches the community. In the 10 years that I've been outside of Microsoft, that was not true about most of the community involvement and marketing messages coming out of Microsoft. It very much was like, here's how you go and do that. Here's how you go and use the product. Here's how you go and do something. Where now Microsoft, there seems to be a recognition, and maybe this is my perception on all this, but that it's much more about, here's what it's capable of doing, and there are oftentimes multiple ways of getting to that end result that you as a client are looking for. and here's how you can do it. Here's how you can use it within the supported framework of the workloads of the systems. It's like SharePoint. Can I go build a CRM platform out of SharePoint? Yes, you can. Should you? We don't recommend go get a CRM product for that, but it's like you go and do certain things with it. Yeah. So Microsoft is not going to tell you how to do something specifically or how not to do something. Well, I guess they will tell you a lot of things that what not to use the technology for, but you get the broader meaning of it, where they're not dictating how to go and do certain things. It's more of a here's what's possible, here's what's capable, let's give you and make it more open so that you can go and tailor the fit of the technology to meet the needs, the culture, the specific requirements of your business.
Yeah, and I'll tie that back to the discussion about, the shift in the culture and the mindset at Microsoft that a lot of people associate with the change in leadership with Satya as CEO, because he's been a big driver of that and a big voice for that change in the culture and talking to people. But I mean, really, you think about one of the things that stood out right after the change of leadership to Satya, which was the release of Office products for iOS and Android, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that really speaks to what you're saying about Microsoft telling people what they need to do. Like before, the mindset was you must use Windows Phone because it's our product or whatever,
Right.
And
even more so was Microsoft had the Macintosh business unit. In fact, I had a buddy that worked there. It was I was in the same building when I started there in 2006. They were 2 floors down, and so the MacBoo, they were like a second-class citizen. And you see new features in Word and PowerPoint, and it could be months or years before the same features were then adapted into that tool. But now it's much more of a Microsoft. And part of it, I'm going to paraphrase here what Satya said. He's like, this is at that first Microsoft partner conference, 3-4 years ago. And he said, our goal is to build the best software and services, in the world. Where we don't have the best solution or we don't have any solution, we want to integrate with, we want to partner with to provide the best experiences for the part that we own. Anyway, that's a very rough paraphrase, but.
I think it is totally a change. Mac OS, I think, has always been an important part of Microsoft's business. I think Bill Gates said something like, every Mac sold is a license of Office almost, right? Pretty much.
It's the number one software tool that is on Macintosh is the Office suite.
Yeah, but one of the other, I think, more obvious changes is somebody was, I think at Build, they said something like there are more. Probably it was, virtual machine instances running Linux in Azure than there are instances running Windows right now. And I mean, again, it's symbiotic, right? I mean, Azure consumption is huge. The revenue coming in and the growth from Azure is one of the most important things right now. And so the focus on, kind of telling people you have to use Windows, right? It doesn't make as much sense when you're focused on growing cloud usage. And I think the technology is also another thing that's enabled that product, that mission of Satya, right? So when you talk about bringing features to Mac first or at the same time, one of the examples we point to a lot is the sharing dialogue, right? You've seen those demos at SharePoint Conference and other places where when you hit that share button, whether it's in Finder or File Explorer or on the mobile app, right, the service behind that provides that sharing experience, it's the same service. That's a part of the power of the cloud is by enabling these services that provide the same experience no matter where you are, and that helps Microsoft achieve that mission too of basically letting you use it wherever you are, right? And providing that flexibility, and it's more about the person and less about the technology there.
Yep, and that is one of the biggest points of applause out of the was last year when it was announced, like the that the SharePoint the UI for libraries was basically going to be the exact same experience as in OneDrive.
Yeah.
And that they would, just to your point, that they would function the same way. And because that was a big complaint, was not only was the interface different, where you'd click, what you'd click, but the options you were provided in various workloads were different, and making those things consistent. But also other things, deeper integration to know that, well, when you are uploading content into SharePoint or into Teams or creating a new Yammer group or wherever those things are, that it's the same interfaces, that it's a unified, backend, that it's, it's SharePoint under the covers, back behind all of that, and SQL and Azure and kind of all those other pieces. So it's becoming a more unified story. It makes sense. It makes the the user experience more fluid across
Yes.
those things and easier. But it also the administration and development activities across those. You don't have to go learn to develop for 3-4 different platforms. You're doing it, the same way across those things.
And now when you're talking about the files experience, you're hitting right at my day-to-day focus and concerns right now. One of the things I'm really thinking about a lot lately is you've seen it at SharePoint conference this year, talking about how that same experience that's across OneDrive and SharePoint right now is also coming to Teams, right? So that Files tab, when you click in Teams, and again, it's that consistency. And I'll tell you, it makes my job easier too, because before we had that shared control across all of those, when we're developing new experiences, we got to think about how does it represented in OneDrive? How is it represented in Teams? How is it represented in SharePoint? And then those are 3 different experiences, and we have to, double check. Did we say the same thing here that we said here? And now we've got a lot. It's just consistency by design, right? Whenever we design it, we need to still take into consideration all of those different experiences. So in a little way, that makes it harder at the design point. You have to say, are we designing this in a way that works across, that provides great experience across all these? But really in the execution part of it, and just trying to keep track of all those different experiences, it makes it a lot easier for us to provide a better, more consistent experience across all those.
So in that vein, is it appropriate for me to tell you my biggest complaint that is in your world, that to see if
we just talked about how I'm listening to you one-on-one and you're providing feedback, and it's
well, there you go. That's all you need to do, people, is create a podcast, invite Tom along, and hit him with all of your specific requirements. But no, it's here's something, and maybe maybe there's a solution in the works or something you could tell me, but or maybe you just hear this feedback. When I go in and open up File Explorer, I mean, I expect when I open that up, it goes into shows everything I'm connected to, my server, my desktop. It's got I can see my 3 different OneDrive accounts that are mapped to that. I can see my Dropbox folder that I use with my design company, and so I've got all those assets. That's all fine. Love the favorites, being able to pin things to it. That was a great feature add last couple of years. That's the File Explorer experience. Now, I work within Teams. I have SharePoint and Teams. I'm in and out of all day long through these things. If I'm working then in an office applications, I'm in Teams, I open something, I go to save it, or I'm looking for files within something, I have to navigate to that place, that folder, and save something. I can close it, have another document, go to save it. I have to do that same navigation all over again. There needs to be a way that it recognizes that I'm working in a space, I'm working a place, and put me right into the location where I was working and saving and pulling things out of, having to constantly go and dig for the same thing over and over and over again, because when I open up that window, I can't save to, I can't open to from that same location. I've got to go dig into that subfolder of a subfolder. And the answer is not stop using folders.
No, not at all. No, and
environments.
this is absolutely something that's heard here. I don't think this is something, like I don't think
New, that's different, right? This has
product
been around
direction
for a while, yeah.
based on you telling me this today, right? I think there's a lot of stuff that's already in motion to address this because the reality is where the product growth is for SharePoint and OneDrive and Office and Windows is really, SharePoint's about collaboration, Office is about collaboration, and you want to be able to pick up where you left off, no matter what product you're in. We want to provide a consistent experience across all of them. I think there's a lot of things in place to make that happen. We work across Windows and Office and SharePoint better today, I think, than we did when I first started here 3.5 years ago. I think there were efforts in place, but there's really been a lot more integration, reorganization, and focused effort on making sure the experience is consistent across all the products. But one thing I think that is very visible to you, and you'll see more of it over time right now, is the search experience, right?
Yep.
And this is something I know there's been a lot of frustration in the community. I've heard it, right? I've been standing at the search booth at Ignite when people came up and said, when is this going to happen? And when is that going to happen, right? And I mean, I've been on the other side of it too before I joined, because I think that search is important and there's been a lot of investment over time and we always want to see it get better. But here's one thing I thought was really cool recently that goes towards the vision that you're painting. And that is when actually another friend of ours, Jeremy Thake, pointed out at a local meetup that I help organize here in Redmond that I think you may have been to before, but
Yep, one time. Yeah, since it's been rebranded, yep.
Yeah, and I think you made it one time to my San Antonio meetup as well.
I did as well.
Yeah, that was awesome. So Jeremy said in his talk after build, he said, did you know that when you search from the Windows, I don't know, what is the name of that bar? The search bar at the bottom of Windows 10, right now, if you're using the latest build, which, I am, because I'm in that group and we don't really have a choice, actually, honestly. We're dog fooding it, right? We're testing out the latest things. You search for a file and it comes up, if it's in OneDrive or SharePoint, in Windows right now, right? And that's part of what what Microsoft Search is enabling. And so some of the things that we've been asking for years are finally starting to come in, and you'll see that affect all the products across all of Microsoft 365, the improvements in Microsoft Search.
Yeah, I think there's again, from a Teams perspective, having the what do they call it? They're like the search box up in the top of the window, and having that similar experience to train people now to use and it says right in the box in Windows at the bottom, it says type here to search.
Type here to search. Yeah, I know. It's the same too.
And having that, and there's been a lot of discussion around pulling up the results, which will be across all of the systems that you're plugged into, pulling from your LinkedIn, the Bing search results, your desktop, from SharePoint, from Teams, from really having that truly federated view of the search results. Everything should come back to that experience, and we're rapidly moving that direction. And the only complaint there is when having search conversations with people is, and as you know, is just, again, ensuring that all of the workloads are integrated with and pushing data to the Microsoft Graph so the API can leverage those and access those. So it's making sure that the data sources that you're trying to make as part of that federated search experience are correctly publishing to the right location. And it should be by default. I don't need to go set up permissions or anything. This is my system. The system should instantly recognize that I have permissions to these SharePoint environments, to these Teams workspaces, these Yammer groups, these OneDrive folders, these things out in LinkedIn, kind of all of those places. I shouldn't have to go and take any additional steps if I'm logged in and I'm authorized to see content across those places.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you know, the integration with Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive is certainly helping from a file experience, and with Office products, you know, when you're syncing to the cloud, when you're saving by default to the cloud from Office, when they're saved, when you just create a conversation, you know, that creates a data point, right? That's already available in search right now. I think another thing that's really interesting to me about what you just said is the Bing company search, right? So I've, you know, I think you and I both have over the years tried out all the Microsoft. We like to look at the new things. We like to see if we can incorporate them. If they make sense, we will, right? So Bing, I've been back and forth on lots of times. I don't know how many failed attempts I've made to switch my browser to Bing, browser search to Bing in the years. It used to be that way with the OneDrive sync client until the recent improvements in the last few years. I kept trying OneDrive and the sync client. It kept failing on me, right? And you hit that failure, and it's hard to go back, right? And I've now changed my default search engine everywhere to Bing on my phone, on you know on in Edge. Which, by the way, I'm using Edge Dev, which I don't know if you've used it yet, the new Mozilla-based browser, but they asked us to switch, I don't know, 5 months ago here in the internal builds of Edge Dev. And again, that was one of those things. I tried it. I changed my default browser everywhere as soon as I could. At first, it was only in internal testing, so I couldn't change my home computers. As soon as they said that it was no longer internal testing only, I changed all my home computers over to Edge Dev too, because it's that same consistent experience you're expecting if you've been using Chrome a lot. But it's got that tie into the Microsoft ecosystem that is very valuable if you're using you know, Microsoft 365 every day like we are. But they are changing to Bing because when I'm logged in to my work account, when I type in a search term, I can show results across Teams and Yammer and OneDrive and SharePoint. And it's super valuable, really, right? Like now, my go-to method, if I need to look up somebody like Sahil Malik just joined Microsoft earlier this year. I don't know if you know him, but he's an MVP from the DC area. And I grew up in DC, so I go back all the time. And another great community hire. I just heard he's going to join my hackathon team coming up for 1 week hackathon. So I'm excited to have his expertise there. But if I need to look him up, right, like who does he report to? I can just type his name in Bing. I could type in Sahil Malik manager, and I can see it's Rich, who DiZarega, who's a great community member in Texas who I've been connected to for a long time. And anyway, so that's one of those. I think it's not quite all the way there. I'm using, you know, internal builds, but this is in the next few years. I think you'll see this integration across the products make the search even more valuable and make that experience of getting back to where you started from or what you were working on even easier.
Yeah, I agree, and I do recognize the improvements there. Like I said, for my specific scenarios, you know, probably the biggest help, the greatest help has been just being able to pin documents within specific applications, workloads, so that I'm not having to go and dig again and again. They're just right there. And so again, on a daily basis, the stuff that I'm actively working on, I make sure that I pin them right there. So I'm not having to go and search for which version was I working on where, you know, and have that latest version right there. But it's, yeah, there, like always, there's always room for an improvement, for feedback. I think part of what we have to train ourselves on doing is ensuring if we see that there's a gap there's somewhere to go and this is the hardest part, time-wise, time-consuming, to go and search to see if it's being addressed, if it's already been outlined, articulated within user voice, and that people are voting on that, and to go lend your voice to that. Always start with that search, be aware of what's already in progress there. There's nothing more frustrating than going to try and, you know, solve a problem that's out there and you find dozens of entries that are, higher up in your search results that have no conclusive answer, to dig a bit deeper and find, oh, actually, it's being addressed here. It's in the roadmap. It's, Microsoft has responded to something. And I've actually found myself going back, providing a link to user voice in some of these other, public locations where it was being discussed, where nobody seemed to find an answer to it and say, hey, it's actually being discussed over here. So
Yeah. And I think you're right. There's always room to improve. I think Microsoft's always done a great job of engaging the community and educating the community. I don't know if you've used, other products. Like I've used a lot of other products in the past, from other technology companies, and I really have found the resources available to learn about the products much more challenging. I think Microsoft does a great job, always has, and continues to improve. I think on the, I'll call it change management, right? Obviously, this has always been a struggle. It's something that I think as community members, we've always felt as a strong point of ours, right? Is helping our customers understand where the product's going and how to make the best use of it. And that involves understanding, a lot of research into the product. One of the things I think as a community member, and Microsoft's been hiring a lot of great community members in, like I mentioned, Sahil, that I like to provide value back to the product team while I'm here and just in daily interactions is connections, to the community members like yourself. And I don't know if you've watched the Regarding 65 Message Center podcast.
I have.
Yeah, so that's one of my favorite things, is to tell people about a Regarding 365 Message Center podcast, about a Message Center post maybe that we had written.
Yep.
Or maybe one I hadn't written, but I knew they were involved with. And just to show, how they're like, wow, you mean these two guys read every single Message Center post and comment on it, and that's a podcast, and people watch it, right? And I think sometimes it's easy to forget how involved, the community is, how invested in understanding things, and how important it is from a product team perspective to make sure that we're communicating clearly when the product's changing and how it's changing. And so I think, again, that's an area of continual improvement, but I think that there's a lot of steps in the right direction there in terms of communicating out the change well. But we certainly want to hear more from you about, how we can do that better.
The number one question that I hear when I go to events, and I get, people will, IM me or email me after a webcast is, how do you keep up with everything? And my first answer is always, I don't. But then two,
try to keep up with everything. Yeah.
Right. But and two is I tap into certain community voices. And so I always point people over to the Regarding 365, the podcast, the video, the vlog, the blog that's out on Medium. It's just a fantastic resource for that. But I made a comment about how, the guys, Daniel and
Daryl.
Daryl, Daryl actually responded. I said, well, how much time did they invest in keeping up with all that? And Daryl responded and said, it's not as much work as you'd think, because they read the emails that come out, which are summarized. They dig into some of them they're aware of, others that they have to dig in a little bit more around that. And they go look at it. He says, and then talk about that.
Yeah.
And they kind of talk through it and are playing with the features and showing this is what it is. But it is already summarized. A lot of that, they're just being consistent about reading up, following up with each of those and asking questions. And then they divide and conquer just with the topics that are covered, and occasionally have other experts from the community that will come in and speak on certain aspects that they're novices around.
Yeah.
So
yeah. One of my favorite guests on that show actually was I think it was, his name's Dan Fernandez. I always forget, but he was driving the shift from TechNet to Docs, and there was a Message Center post about it, right? And So it had communicated, circulated, made the rounds amongst the writers. My manager, Pam Green's a big podcast listener as well. And I think she might have noticed it, that they'd called out, like, they were a lot of concerns as they was reading through this message center post that, hey, TechNet is going away and Docs is coming. And this was years ago, right? I think by now, obviously, Daryl and Dan are big fans. Daniel are big fans of Docs at Microsoft.com. But at the time, it was a little concerning, right? It's big change. And so anyway, we were able to make the connection and get, one of the PMs directly behind that change. He connected with them, and Daryl did a follow-up episode directly with him, just kind of like this, over Teams, one-on-one, and they posted that as a new update. And I thought that was a great connection and a great result of their awesome community effort to keep us honest and help keep customers aware of what's changing.
I wish more of the folks from the product and product marketing teams would get on there, do communities. I'll tell you right now, just because I've had with our Loop 365 series, Noah Sparks and I have had a difficult time getting product people to show up for meetings, and they'll come back and be like, well, and we're not sure if we're ready to have a conversation. We'll wait until we're at version 2. We're like, what are you talking about? It's out there. It's live. We just want to talk to you to better understand, and that perspective, ask some questions about generally available features and products. That why is there fear about talking about that? We're not trying to gotcha on anything. We just want to have a conversation and better understand. And I think that that's another cultural change inside Microsoft. Like when I got chastised as an employee for having a blog.
Yeah, right. That's a big change, right?
Yeah, huge change. So I was very much of the Robert Scoble vein of the like you don't know what you're talking about, I'm going to ignore you.
Yeah.
But when the formal I know it's changed its name, but LCA, so the legal team then sends you kind of a formal cease and desist your blog. You do that. But anyway, well, listen, Tom, I know we've gone way over on our time. Really appreciate your time today. You're probably in a ghost town in this 4-day weekend there, but I'll let you get back into it. But for people that want to find out more about you, get in touch with you, what are the best ways to reach you? What social tools, platforms, where can you be found?
Sure. So, I mean, for people who are involved with social media, I'm on Twitter at Reesing, RESING. I blog a lot less these days at tomreesing.com now that I'm like writing
for a living. I know. Yeah.
And then I'm also on LinkedIn, and I've been posting a lot more on LinkedIn. I've been trying to share like one technology or Microsoft related insight a day about on LinkedIn lately. But to tie it back to the writing, I think where we really want people to engage with us more and more every day is right there in our product, in our where we're communicating to customers. So that feedback button, whenever you see that feedback button in the product, a lot of times that comes right back to us. Sometimes it might be triaged, right? But people are listening on the other end of that. And a lot of times what happens if you hit the feedback button, if you allow the product to, it'll send some diagnostic information. A lot of times it's really very helpful for context setting, in terms of responding to issues. And then you'll see that on our writing platforms as well. So docs.microsoft.com, on every article now, there are 2 feedback buttons on the bottom, right? And so one is for feedback about that article that you just read, or if you see a content issue, a gap, something that's not been addressed, that is actually becomes a tracked issue. And this is something that I'm sure you felt as a Microsoft employee. You probably do it these days today as well. If you don't have feedback tracked in a system somewhere, it's really hard to make sure that you're addressing all the things that come in. So every content feedback item that comes in on docs.microsoft.com is an issue that's created in GitHub, attached to that repo, and there is a writer assigned to each of those issues, and then that's something I can go through and I can look, what are all the issues, that have been submitted on documents where I'm the writer of record, and what have we done? Have we closed this out? Have we addressed the issue? Is there more feedback? And so that's actually a way you can directly talk to the writers, and a lot of times product team members that are writing those articles, and sometimes it's even community members writing those articles. Yep. And you can and they'll respond right there in the issues, and everybody can see it.
And then the second button, the second feedback is about the content of what's being discussed. So if it's an article about, a feature or something, a capability within the product, so it goes back to the product team?
Yeah. So there's two buttons, sorry. Yeah. The one is about the content, and that's what I was talking. That's an issue tracked in GitHub. And the other one is about the product, right? So if you're reading the article and you say, there's something like, there's something I'd like the product to do, but it doesn't do, right? Like the article's correct. It correctly describes the situation I'm in. I agree. I don't need to change the article.
It's functioning as designed. However,
that's when you hit the other button.
Right.
And each of the product teams is responsible for where that goes. For a lot of them, it's user voice, right? For OneDrive and SharePoint, we know it's user voice where that goes.
Yeah, I had experience with that exact thing was when finding around teams, and from a compliance standpoint, specifically where there's hybrid connector with Exchange. So on-prem Exchange with an organization using Teams. So part of their organization was on-prem Exchange through acquisition, and they were maintaining that. They had the hybrid connector and some compliance features that were missing, and the documentation was lacking. It was almost like they were talking around that hole that was there.
Yeah.
And we were able to point that out both in the documentation and as well as to the product team. Anyway.
Yeah, no, that's great. And honestly, for a broad audience, I think the issues are great. For people like yourself that are very familiar with the issues, there's a step further you can take. I don't know if you've done this yet, but you can submit a pull request, and it sounds a little intimidating. And I think
I've done that. Yep.
You've done it. So, okay, that's great. So you can
you
can actually write the content you think is missing and submit it. And a lot of times, more than often than not, you might be surprised to find it'll just be published just as you wrote it.
And then the fourth option that you have, if you know the person at the product, is I call the main Microsoft number and ask to be transferred to Tom.
Is that right? I don't know.
Yeah, that's what you want to do. Get a bunch of phone calls. I'm not saying that that people always answer the calls, but I'm just saying that I always joke that, in the early days, I don't do it much anymore, but I used to frequently give out Bill Bear's email and his desk number to people. And Bill would be like, no, please, I enjoy like that kind of thing. I'm like, all right.
Well, I've experimented with that in the past. I think my main concern is actually all those automated skimmers that come through, right? Because most of the phone calls I'm getting are from, unfortunately, the AI is getting too good, right?
But it's not good.
Yes,
but yes,
right. Yes, it's not.
Right.
But I had a friend at Rackspace when I was there who, on his Twitter account, and he may still do it today, posts his phone number, his cell phone number, and he says, you'd be surprised. He always tells everybody they could call him. I haven't gone quite that far myself. But I do publish my email address on my website. But he said, you'd be surprised. The number of people that call me that you would think wouldn't be a positive interaction is very, very small. Like it's almost always a very good interaction when somebody, because people use discretion, right? They say, when do I want to actually talk to this guy? Do I have something interesting to say to him, right? And they think about that interpersonal relationship.
No, I subscribe to that, that same thing. So it's, at the end of every one of my videos, and that there's has my direct number on there. But same thing, right? Like yeah. I don't. I mean, look, I get the spam phone calls, same as others, but it's generally people that have genuine interest in, hey, here's what I'm, looking to do. Are you the right person, or do you know somebody, or, hey, can you help me with this? And, so it's, it's been minimal impact. So I think it's a great tool. But
Cool.
well, anyway, well, Tom, I really appreciate your time for the extended discussion here. A lot of great information. Always enjoy our discussions, and I'll just thinking when I'm going to see you next, but I'll see you in a few weeks when I'm out for SharePoint Fest Seattle.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to that. Yeah, that's always a great event, and we're doing a local community tie-in there too. I would like to mention. On Thursday night of SharePoint Fest, we will be hosting a local Office 365 meetup at the event venue. So Art Kane reached out to us, or David Wilhelm, both of them, and offered us to have that. So our community members can attend the last 2 sessions of the day on Thursday just by registering through a link. And then we'll have a meetup. And I believe we may be having a SharePoint afterwards as well that will be sponsored by the community as well. So
well, excellent.
Really looking forward to all of that.
Well, I'll see you there. I'll be there for sure.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Tom.